So welcome to another edition of Diary of a Sales Expert podcast. And as you all know, I love to do some incredible interviews with incredible people. And I'm absolutely honoured that a wonderful lady that I was introduced to called Catherine Baker has been able to join me today. Catherine is an incredible lady. She's a non-executive director. She is involved in so many different organisations, which she'll talk about in a moment. But she's also the author of a brilliant book called Stay in the Distance, which is, I think, she'll explain herself, has had a number of incredible sports people across the world talk about and share the insights that she's given. So I'm very grateful she's given up her time to share with me. So thank you, Catherine.
I'm absolutely excited to be here, James. Thanks for inviting me on, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Great. Look, so look, just for those that don't know much about you, and obviously they will get to know you. And by the way, your book is in the background there, and we're going to actually, as I always say, stay tuned at the end of the podcast because we always release and give some copies of the book for those that are here. Talk to me about you and firstly your background and how you got into doing what you're doing now, basically over the course of your career.
Yeah, because it's quite a potted history, as is often the case, isn't it? So I'll try and give you a bit of a flavour, but not keep it too long. So I'm one of five. My twin and I were numbers 4 and 5. So my parents had 5 children under the age of 6. So as you can imagine, it was a pretty chaotic childhood, but one in which, you know, getting outside, activity, sport was really encouraged. So very fortunate in that. Also fortunate in having older siblings. So always having bigger, better, stronger to kind of compete with. That was all very relevant in me having a real interest in and early success around sport. So tennis and hockey were the 2 sports that I sort of really got going with. When I was 12, I was asked to choose between the 2 if I wanted to make it. It was suggested I needed to do that at that age. I couldn't because I loved both of them for different reasons. I loved tennis because it was adversarial, gladiatorial, up to you. You know, you had to really rely on yourself. I loved hockey because I played with all my mates and, you know, I was good at it, etc. So I didn't continue playing both at representative level. But when I got to 18 and left school, sort of decisions to make. And actually, I went down the academic route. So I went to university, very fortunately sponsored by a Magic Circle law firm through law school and trained as a corporate lawyer. So quite a difference, but, you know, wonderful first career surrounded by very impressive, very professional people, stayed in the world of corporate law for 13 years. And then, as often happens, you know, life takes over, family move, etc. So had a period where I kind of had a transition phase, picking up different skills, sampling different things, all of which led to giving me the confidence back in 2015 to set up my business, Sport and Beyond, which really brought together my knowledge and love and passion around sport and my sort of professional career and certainly my real interest in leadership. And very fortunately, over the last 8 years, I've had the privilege of working with many of our elite athletes, elite coaches, and also I now coach a number of CEOs across the sports sector and elsewhere as well. On top of non-exec roles, as you say, 3 non-exec roles as well. So quite busy.
You are a very busy lady, and we talked about that. We were talking before today about how, you know, you're flying, you know, you're on the train probably, I guess, rather than flying, because you're probably rather than from Yorkshire to London a lot. But just before we go into the elements around some of the stuff around, you know, you do talk about that 18-year-old you, or that time, maybe reaching back to when you were 12, when you were told to pick and choose, you know, between one and the other. You know, what was that decision like for you? Because I guess the question as you go through life is people have to make decisions. And I know it's probably difficult to go back to when you were 12, but decisions are for us all as business owners and people in sports people to make all the time. How was that decision back then for you? And did you ever regret it? Do you ever wish you'd gone down the route of a different path? Or would you always sort of think, no, actually, I did the right thing in doing what you did?
Gosh, I mean, there's so much in that, James. That's a great question. I think the things I'd pull out, knowing yourself, and kind of knowing how you operate and what works for you. So I wouldn't have known that thoughtfully, really, at 12, but I probably knew instinctively that actually, and it's something which has really proved true as I've gone through life and career, I like variety. I'm not very good at being completely single-minded and focused on one thing. So I think part of that decision was around appreciating that if I just chose one, I probably wouldn't do as well as maybe people thought, because I might get a bit bored. And I'll come back to that in a sec. But I think the other thing that was relevant around that decision was maybe support. So from you know, very privileged, fortunate background, but the sort of background where it probably wasn't considered appropriate for a young girl to go into a professional sports career for all sorts of reasons. Luckily the world is very different now. Yeah. So it wasn't probably something that I was encouraged to do or supported in doing. And I think that's often quite relevant in our decision making, isn't it? To go back to the focus on knowing yourself. So we've got 3 sons and all very fortunate, grown up playing a lot of sport and really enjoyed it. Middle son, incredibly talented, very natural sportsman. Youngest son, equally very talented. But the difference between the two, and the younger one actually has gone into professional sports career, whereas the middle one hasn't, isn't about talent, isn't about ability, but it's about the sort of mindset and the desire and the ability to be totally single-minded and focused. So when people say to me, gosh, your youngest son must be so talented to have, got to where he's got to, I'm like, the talent actually is the ability to be single-minded and focused and really know what you want. That's the talent, because there's hundreds of kids out there with all sorts of ability. So I think that was probably relevant as well. Thinking back to my 12-year-old, person, I knew I wasn't, that wasn't in part of my makeup.
But I want to come back to the element around understanding that, because I think that's really interesting around the aspect of, that ability, the natural ability versus nurture, or the mindset versus aspects around it. But go back to sort of your career as becoming a lawyer. What made you choose law as a pathway? Was there anything particular that was it family? Was it just that you had because I also think there's a lot of things in law and medicine and those sort of areas that are very similar to sport, and a long time there's a lot of work involved to train and to get to qualification, isn't it? It's not an easy path.
Exactly. So I'm definitely driven. I'm definitely someone who strives and works hard. So I think that was relevant. There was, family knowledge around. So my father was a lawyer. One of my brothers had qualified as a lawyer. So that helps, doesn't it, in terms of understanding those doors. Actually, my mother, who was one of the first women ever to qualify as an architect right. back in the day, but then had 5 children and really struggled to combine everything, said to me very, very sensibly when I was quite young, the thing about, she could see that I was ambitious and I was going to be someone who wanted to have a decent career. She said, get a professional qualification, because you've always got that behind you and no one can ever take that away. So I think that probably resonated and landed. A lot of what your parents say doesn't, does it? But that one did. And I think I was attracted to the type of work I felt I was going to be doing. I wanted to go and work in the city, and I very fortunately landed a job with a city firm. And again, I knew I was going to be surrounded in that kind of environment by driven, and I'm careful to overstate driven, and I'm sure we'll pick up on this in the sense that that's got to be sustainable. But driven by, surrounded by people who were professional, wanted to give of their best and wanted to do well for their clients, and that appealed to me.
And we will pick up on the driven angle, but just to go back to the aspect around, the choices that, because obviously you talked about your 2 sons and you love your sons all the same in the same way. But what do you think is, without going deep into your family and prior, but what do you think has been, obviously that single-mindedness and determination of your younger son but that application, what do you think, and you've obviously worked with and engaged with, business, CEOs, but also those in sport. Can you put your finger on that sort of magic that they have that is the difference between that sort of talent, but then applying the talent?
Yeah, I'd love to, because I think it's really central to what I believe and also what the business is all about. So talent is just the stage, right? Whether it's cooking or music or art or tennis or whatever it might be, we're all going to have natural levels of talent in whatever areas. That's just the stage. The anchor, however, the platform, however you want to term it. It's what you do with that talent that it really makes the difference. You can have people who are uber talented in areas and for various reasons don't do anything with it. Other people who naturally have lower levels of talent, but through the right mindset, the right attitude, the right opportunities, the right experiences really drive that through. So that's the first thing. Talent is just that sort of first stage, platform stage, whatever. Then I think the mindset piece, you get, some of that might be nature, but a lot of that will be nurture. So the family environment that you're in. There's a brilliant example of an entrepreneur who came up with Spanx. And she used to sit around for dinner every night with her family, and her dad would say, what did you fail at school today? And she will say that's what gave her an appetite to try, to fail, to learn from failure, etc. So definitely the environment in which you grow up is really important. And I'll come back to that in a sec, actually, because there's some brilliant research that I mentioned in my book. Then I think definitely setbacks are relevant. So, for example, youngest son, first time he was put forward for a very exciting selection, he didn't get selected. That was like at 14, 15. What a great opportunity for him then to decide, is this what I want or not? Because actually, if it's not, fair enough, didn't get selected. But if it is, what do I need to do to make sure next time I am selected, what do I need to do to make sure I worked hard? He's also had a couple of quite serious long-term injuries, which when you're a young player, you really do build that resilience. So opportunities and an environment around you to build some of that mindset that perhaps doesn't come naturally. I was going to come back, wasn't I, to the striving piece. Yeah, so there's a brilliant piece of research I referred to at the beginning of my book called the Great British Medalist Study. It was a piece of work carried out in the Rio cycle. What that means is the time between London 2012 Olympics and Rio 2016. They paired 32 athletes. So 16 pairs of athletes, and in each pair there was a super elite athlete and an elite athlete. Super elite winning gold medals at Worlds, at Olympics, maybe multiple gold medals. Elite making the teams, so making the team for the Olympics, making the Worlds, but maybe not winning medals. They looked at the commonalities between both sets of pairs and the distinctions. And in the commonalities, what they discovered were things like growing up in a culture of striving, having a real level of conscientiousness towards their training and a level of commitment towards their sport. So really fascinating to see those things coming out, and those were common to both sets of athletes.
And so it's common, the conscientiousness and the commitment to it. But what was did the research show actually what was the bit that made the, because was it natural talent? I'm just, because if I think about, athletes, and you see some incredible stories of people that obviously, and we all love to see it when they failed, not failed is the wrong word, but they didn't get the result they wanted to at one Olympic. And then they said, no, I'm going to go again. And I remember having a conversation with Max Whitlock, who was, from a gymnastic perspective, was I didn't get quite the result I wanted. So I went again. And it's that. Did the research show sort of what made the difference between sort of those that were happy to be on the team versus those that said, no, I'm not happy to be at that level, I want to get higher?
Yeah, and there's quite a few factors within that, but I'll just draw out one of them because I draw it out specifically in the book around the chapter How to Sustain Your Motivation. So the distinction, one of the big distinctions is whether they focus on process or whether they focus on outcome. So I won't remember the exact stats, but something like 14 out of 16 of the super elite athletes focused as much on process as they did on outcome. And I think it was only 3 of the 16 elite athletes that did that. What do I mean by that? So let's say that I've got a bin in the corner of my room, my corner of my office, and I want to throw my apple core into the bin. If I'm just focused on outcome, I'll do it. And by the time I've got it, once I've got it in, that's it. No need to carry on, right? And also, I'm probably not going to experiment too much in ways to do it. I'm just going to try and get it in as quickly as possible. If I focus on process, however, I might get it in, but I might be annoyed that I haven't quite used the best method, or I think I can come up with a better method. So I'm going to keep going and keep going and keep going. So that's obviously relevant to the chapter How to Sustain Your Motivation, but also very relevant to the distinction between these two sets of athletes. Those who really focused on the process didn't just want to get the best results. They wanted to get the best process possible. They wanted to go about things in the best way possible in order to get these extraordinary results. So there's a number of athletes that I refer to in the book that focus on this. Emma Raducanu was an example. When she won, the US Open, she and her coach at the time, Andrew Richardson, only had process goals through that entire run from the qualifiers to winning the US Open. They didn't have outcome goals. They only had process goals.
And much in the same way, and it's incredible, really insightful. In much in the same way as a lot of people in business see the reward of, let's call it, their sale of their business or success of their business as a byproduct, if you like, of their process. Do you think actually, it sounds a daft thing to say that when you get up and they're on the stage and you've won the gold medal, this is what I've won. But do they actually realise that that's the actual thing they're aiming for? Is it just a continual challenge and pursuit of improving the process, if that makes sense? You know what I mean? It's like as if is the actual gold medal or the result just a bit of a byproduct of what they're doing, or have they, that is their single goal, but they've just harnessed their mind to really focus on the elements that they have to improve the process to get there.
I think most athletes would say it was a bit of both, but that second bit being key. So in other words, what do I mean? It's good it's important to have an idea of what you're aiming for. If you decide to be a professional athlete, you're doing it. Generally, you don't get paid a huge amount of money unless you're very, very top. You're doing it because actually you really want to achieve, be the best in the world. So definitely having those kind of North Stars is really important. But the best athletes will be actually understanding that you've got to focus more on the process to get there. There's a great quote from Martina Navratilova: "The moment of victory is too short to live for that and nothing else," right? So if that's all you're living for, then actually it's such a short moment. And if you read most biographies of sports stars, you will find a lot of them have a sense of disappointment, a sense of feeling underwhelmed when they actually achieve these things and win these gold medals. Because actually, okay, it's great, but really it's just, so there can be a level of disappointment. So the ones that really stay the distance and sustain that performance appreciate that, yes, it's what they're aiming for, but actually that's not maybe going to be as fulfilling as they think. More fulfilling is the trying to be the best that you can possibly be, and so really focusing on the process.
And it's when you talk about stuff, there's lots of things that go through my mind around sports people I either know or would like love to know, but you see the results of, and I give an example of let's take in football, for example, and we all know football's a very I know you had your book as the forward was written by Gareth Southgate. I say
not so yet.
Not so yet. Wait until they win the trophy. Yeah. But you see in football a lot, don't you? These young there's some young men and young women now fantastically in terms of the sport. They're being paid large amounts of money. They have this trappings of lifestyle and but actually you could argue they've not really achieved much actually. But then you look at the difference between those that are really at the top of their game, and I use Jude Bellingham as an example at the moment, who to me is, not only just the top of his game from an England perspective and from a football perspective, but when you hear this young man talk and the maturity beyond his ear, and his ability to sort of say, no, I'm continuing, gone to Real Madrid and I'm going to continue to learn, and I'm going to, that difference is incredible, isn't it? And it's a challenge for sports people in some cases there, because they do get into, not in all sports for sure, but in a lot of them, they get those trappings and that fame and that adulation, and then that sort of detracts them away from getting to where they want to get to.
So it can. I'm going to make a couple of points on that. The first one, just very quick, but just because I think it's important to reinforce this. There is no doubt that pay structures are getting better in women's sport, but I think you need to be very careful of collating the two groups, because in pretty much every sport, men get paid so much more than women. So just it's improving, but there's still quite a large disparity. I think it's a really good point though around how you maintain your focus and your desire, probably, especially in a sport like football, where you're from a young age you're being paid so much. So again, I think it comes down to mindset, and actually. One of the chapters I have in the book is called How to Bring the Required Discipline to the Table, because it's not just about motivation. Motivation can go up and down, it can wane, it can ebb and flow. Actually, the people who really succeed over the long term are the ones who are able to bring that required discipline to the table. And there's a brilliant piece of research from the world of sport called The Mundanity of Excellence. The Mundanity of Excellence. And I love it, and I refer to it in the book, because what it reminds you is that excellence doesn't just happen. We see the end result, and we see sports stars or musicians or artists or actors making it look easy. What we don't see is the phenomenal amounts of hard work that have really gone in behind the scenes. There's a lot of sports people who will talk about it's what goes on when no one's looking. That's what makes the difference, etc. So to really understand that, it's a huge amount of hard work that goes into it. And I think the final point I'll make on that, because to bring it back to business and sort of many of your listeners, one of the things I find, I've worked with quite a lot of sports people when they come to the end of their careers, and either mentor or coach them around the transition into kind of, normal life and perhaps a different kind of job. They will often underestimate the fact that they have been in an environment where high performance and excellence are a given, where everybody is striving towards that. Now, we see that sometimes in the business world, don't we? But not always. And I think it's easy for athletes to underestimate the fact that they've effectively grown up in these wonderful environments. They're not all brilliant. We know some of the issues around high performance sport, and I'm certainly not pretending everything's perfect. But generally, they've grown up in environments where everybody has wanted to do their best. Everyone, as you said, has had that focus on constant learning, that humility to understand you can always get better, that thirst for improvement. We don't see as much of that in the business world, and I think that's something which translates and very well and could translate more across from sport to business.
And that's it's really. I was going to ask you. Actually, leads me on nicely to my question as to what do you think are the key learnings that most people in business can take from sport? Is it that element of continuing on with the? And I mean, I work with a lot of people in a sales and business environment. I was in the city on Tuesday, and I was talking to people around, and I have this analogy I use in sales, which is you don't get a six pack without doing the sit ups. And I don't know, I haven't got one. But the point being, I say to people is, if you want to make success in sales and business, you've got to make the calls, you've got to do the work, you've got to do the activity. And if you don't, you're not going to get the results. And when I relate it back to those sort of physical, or I'll say to people, if you want to be a really good golfer, you've got to go and practice. You've got to go and put the time in on the range. Or you've got a tennis player, you've got to go and practice. But that's a sort of similarity. What are the other is there any other key similarities that you think, or learnings you think that business can take from those in sport that those in sport just do by their day-to-day, their demeanor and way of being? It's a de facto thing for them, but business goes, well, it's different. I've never thought of it that way.
Yeah, I think I'll do sort of general and then maybe something specific around that. So it's definitely, one of the reasons I wrote the book is that we are very used to drawing lessons across from sport, across to business and leadership. There's a huge amount of brilliant books. I've got a lot of them behind me. People will have read all sorts of literature, read newspaper articles, whatever, about the lessons we can take across from sport to business and leadership. The challenge I felt around so much of what's out there is that it tends to focus on winning or high performance in the moment. And actually, I felt, and this was acutely emphasized during the pandemic, that we'd all been missing a trick, because sport's been showing us all along not just how to improve, perform, and achieve, but how to do so over the long term in a way that's sustainable. Now, as a leader, and my book is very much aimed at senior leaders, albeit my, teenage and older children are also apparently telling their friends they should be reading it too. But, that's the kind of main target market. As leaders, life is tough. It can be relentless. So the lessons that I focus on are sort of two halves. The first half, how to get the best out of yourself as a leader. And that's very much looking at how you show up to work every day. What approach have you got? What's your mindset? What beliefs are you bringing into the workplace? What behaviors are you demonstrating? Those are all critical in making sure that you really can perform over the long term. And there are some brilliant, but mostly hidden lessons from sport around that. The second half then looks at how you get the best out of those you lead. And again, we know from sport that the same group of players can perform incredibly different depending on the coach or leader that they have and the environment in which they're in. We see that time and time again, don't we? So again, really shining the spotlight on the lessons from sport that I felt have been missing, but have been there all along, but we just haven't been looking in the right place, around how we get the best out of those we lead over the long term. I'm going to give you a specific example, as I said. So, because one of the very fair challenges often is it's great, all very well saying these principles apply in sport and this is how you apply them. Business is very different. We're often talking about companies with a massive, much bigger number of people, etc. So really, Catherine, can you really transfer those principles across? So one example I'll often use is something called purposeful practice. So you referenced it there, James, where a tennis player or a golfer doesn't just go to the court or the course and just knock a few balls. They're going to practice something specific. So they'll have an aim in mind. They'll be pushing themselves with the particular practice they're doing. They'll be getting feedback from their coach, from seeing how their shots are doing. So that's basically the essence of purposeful practice. You've got a specific aim in mind. You go and practice in a purposeful way, you get your feedback and you keep tweaking and improving. Fine in sport, because you practice a lot of the time, you only perform every now and again, whereas in business, we're performing all the time. So, Catherine, how can you possibly say that you can translate that across? Well, are you telling me that you can't take 15 minutes out of your workday to try and focus on a particular skill set? Whether that is when you start meetings, trying to make sure that you build rapport with someone better, whether that is 15 minutes trying to get better at giving a presentation or delivering a talk. There are so many things that you can do in a purposeful way, practice in the workplace, just in a very short space of time, that can make sure that you're steadily improving over time.
And that's such a brilliant example, and it echoes so many things that I was at a workshop with clients yesterday where I talked to them about practice, and they and I was saying to them the same thing. Well, what stops you from practicing? Well, one of the things that people always talk about in business is time, but I'd be interested to get your views on the. I mean, you covered it in the book in many respects, but the element around time management as well, which is actually one of the things that maybe those in sport do they do it better? Are they more protective of their time? Because a lot of people in business, CEOs, and I work with a lot of, they'll tell you they're running out of time, but actually is it because they're not making effective use of their time? Whereas those in sport are a bit more in tune to know what, someone, again, the cricketers that I know will say, right, I know that on Tuesday morning I've got to go and practice my bowling. On Wednesday morning at 10 from 10 to 11 I'm going to practice my batting, for example. So they're much more focused around utilization of time.
Yeah, so thank you, because again, it's a really important area. In fact, I've got a chapter on that called How to Prioritize Your Time. And I start that chapter with a description of Jessica Ennis-Hill's superpower. Now, many of your listeners will know Jessica Ennis-Hill was the face of the London 2012 Olympics, wasn't she? Can you imagine the pressure on a young woman's shoulders? Everywhere she looked in London, on billboards, on the side of buses, there was her face. Amazingly, she performed and she won a gold medal. That, however, is not her superpower. Her superpower had always been her ability to be incredibly focused and to manage her time incredibly well. She would turn up to the track, have absolute clarity and full attention on what she needed to do, and then move to the next thing. That became even more critical when she had her son Reggie, and then she came back to compete at the highest level. Easy again to say, fine for professional sports people, because they don't have that many other calls on their time. They've just got to train and perform. But just imagine someone like Jessica Ennis-Hill. Think about Dame Jessica Ennis-Hill now, obviously. Think about the more successful you are. Think of all the calls on your time. You've got people wanting a piece of you from every area. So it is as much a challenge for them as for others. So what do they do? What enables them to manage their time well? And what can we take across to the world of business? Number one, absolute clarity on their role. So I will often, if I'm working with leaders or delivering a keynote, whatever, I will say to people, can you describe your role in 1 or 2 sentences? And a lot of people find that quite hard. I don't mean job title, I mean role and what that means. Yeah. A lot of people struggle with that. So that's really important to be able to drop, because if you can't define your role, you're going to be saying yes to a whole load of things that you probably shouldn't be saying yes to. So absolutely understanding what your role is, that then enables you to prioritize, doesn't it? So again, if you're an athlete, someone like Jessica Ennis-Hill, if I'm an athlete, this is what I do. I want to win the Olympics. There's a whole lot of process that's going to go into that. So I need to focus on these priorities, etc. So, a better understanding of what the priorities are in order for you to achieve your goals. That ability to say no, I think in business is something which, naturally some people will find it harder or easier than others. But again, it's a skill set that you can build up. I'll often have people saying to me, I find it hard to say no. So we'll talk about things like building in pauses. So James, thanks for asking me to do that. I'm just going to have a think about what else I've got on. Can I come back to you tomorrow and give you my answer? So helpful, especially for people pleasers, in actually giving them that support to say no. Some people will build a sort of set of words or sentences that they use to help them to say no. So really kind of you to ask me, it sounds a great project. I'm really flattered that you want me to be involved, but I've just got too much on and I won't be able to give my full attention to it. So there's lots of ways that people can build up. The other thing then, just to say on that, again, priorities. I will often have senior leaders saying, Catherine, I'm so busy that I don't have time to do my morning walk, go for a run, go to the gym, whatever. I try to contain my barely contained frustration and say, we're going to flip it. I'm so busy that I must find time for my morning walk, going to the gym, my run. It's a simple shift, but it is fundamental. Elite sport for many years would have seen well-being and performance as 2 different ends of the spectrum. Now they see it completely differently. And there's a great quote in my book from a wonderful sportswoman, Lizzie Simmons, that elite sports fully understood that well-being underpins performance. It's the same in the business world. We all have pressures on us. We all work hard. If you don't prioritize your well-being, you will not be able to deliver a good performance over a sustained basis.
I couldn't agree more. And there's a phrase I was given once, I can't remember, the body's the business, right? And the body is your mind, and if you're Absolutely. In business, your body, if you can't operate if you're not mentally in the right place, or if you're physically in the right place. And unfortunately, that's a challenge for lots of people. Look, there's so many elements that I'm conscious of time that I want to talk through with you, but I want to go back to the idea of the setbacks and the failures, because that obviously you mentioned with your son, it was a difficult time for him, but he's obviously come through that. And I've talked to the athletes that I've worked with, and sponsored, I should say, because I a lot of time for them, and they talk about failure. One of the things the two cricketers were saying to me, which is into videos we release next week, they were like, well, we fail. You know, they were saying an average cricketer, for example, when they bowl a ball, the average amount of balls it takes to get a wicket is 50 times. Okay, so the two guys I was talking to are two brothers, and they were like, well, we fail 49 times before we succeed, and they just make it so nonchalantly. They talk about it as that, but yet failure for, like you say, so many in business is difficult. Now, the lady you mentioned, Spanx, was taught up that failure is a good thing. Do you think people in business get taught that failure is a bad thing, whereas lots of people in sport sort of understand that failure is part of their process?
Yeah, I think there's lots I could say on this, and there's actually a brilliant author called Amy Edmondson who's just published a new book called The Right Kind of Failure. So for anyone who's really interested in this topic, do look at Amy Edmondson's book. She's a real expert on this, from Harvard over in the States. Right. The way that we talk about failure is definitely important. You have to be a bit careful, because some businesses hear all this talk about failure and think that everyone's suggesting we actively go out of our way to fail. And obviously in a lot of businesses, especially, for example, airline or health, whatever, you know, that's not going to be right. So that's number one. Second, if however we as an organization or as a business decide that failure is not acceptable, failure is going to happen. So all that results from that is that the failures get hidden underground. They get swept under the carpet. What does that mean? No one's ever going to learn from them. So it's very important to have an environment where it is accepted and expected that there will be failure. Like your bowlers saying 49 times out of 50, effectively that's a failure. But each time they're bowling those balls, they're learning more about the pitch, about the batter they're facing, etc. So failure is critical to success and to an improvement. I think another point I'd make on it is, we all know that being in our comfort zone is a lovely place to be, but nothing ever grows there. You're not going to get stretched and develop, right? So how do we improve and we get better? We move out into our stretch zone. So I always like to think of it as a circle that's your comfort zone, slightly wider circle that's your stretch zone, even wider circle that's your stress zone. You probably don't want to be in your stress zone because it's probably going to be too difficult and you probably undermine your confidence and have maybe some quite big failures. Stretch zone is a good place to be, but you're probably going to fail sometimes because it's, outside of your comfort zone. But the more you're pushing yourself there, the bigger that comfort zone circle gets and the further out are pushed your stretch and stress zone. So if we are not pushing ourselves, we are not going to fail. But therefore, if we're not failing, we're not going to be improving. Huge amount there around growth mindset, which I talk about quite a lot in the book. Misapplied in many ways. It's a sort of a big thing that people have got wrong sometimes, but fundamentally, it's a very important concept that sport's known all along. And that really, again, speaks to the importance of pushing, challenging, learning from failures, learning quickly, learning well from failures, but that's how you're going to improve.
And the reason I want to pick that up on a little bit on this, and before we get on to one other topic about sort of staying the distance, which is the topic of your book, the title of your book. But so I'm a big fan of David Goggins, and I've done David Goggins' challenge. I don't know if he's the ultra marine in the US who literally he's talked about as the hardest person on the planet, as it were, because his mindset is so strong. And he talks about the governor in our brains where we have 40% and you have to push through it. And he said your mind is no different to sort of your parts of your body which you want to give up, but you push through those elements. But there is obviously that challenge between sort of staying the distance and keeping on and getting to progress, and that point where people do say enough's enough, I want to give up. And in the work you've done with, even in business and in sport, has there been anything that you've noticed specifically that is, I wouldn't say the difference, those that, hard to say quit is the wrong phrase, but those that don't get to that point, but those that then do carry on, is there anything that's obvious you think that you've seen in the work you do that's what these people have that the others sometimes don't, that those listening can then say, right, okay, I know that this is my goal, and I know that I've just got to go through what Catherine said over the course of the next few months or years to get to where I want to be?
Yeah, again, it's a really good tension that you've picked up there, James. So thank you. I'm just trying to think the best place to start. So we know from a huge amount of research that the brain can limit what our bodies are capable of. So like you were saying, imagine I'm running a half marathon and I get, I've never run beyond, let's say, 8 miles, and I get to 7, 8 miles and I'm really tired. My brain actually could sort of stop me going on any further. But we know from research that if you fool the brain, it's amazing actually what your body can do. So they've done all sorts of tests where they've set challenges for people rowing on rowing machines, and they've changed the dials and sort of made them incorrect, and people have rowed further or faster than they thought they could have done. So we know that, as you say, the governor of that brain bit's really important. Absolutely. However, you've raised, what I think is a very nuanced question around, sometimes does that mean that we're actually pushing ourselves too far? And I think probably the easiest way to answer it is around the concept of grit. So another academic and author from the States called Angela Duckworth did a big piece of work on what she called grit. A number of years ago now, and I can't remember the exact definition, but basically sort of perseverance towards a long-term goal. And she'd studied all sorts of military cadets, and shown that the ones that had the most grit were the ones that were most likely to sort of pass out from their training, and as in achieve and succeed and finish their training, as opposed to passing out fainting. And there was a bit of a backlash off the back of that work, which was actually sometimes it is right to accept and say, I need to stop. This isn't for me. I'm not going to succeed in this challenge, and there's no point carrying on. And actually, she then sort of came back with a second body of work saying, absolutely right. I'm not suggesting people should be doing this to the extreme, because actually you can burn yourself out, you can damage yourself, you can injure yourself, you can try to achieve something which really just isn't for you and you shouldn't be. So that understanding of when to pull back, when to pull out, when to change course is actually really important as well. So it's a really nuanced area. I think it's a fascinating one in terms of when you make that decision. And for those who are interested, again, if you research Angela Duckworth and grit, then that's a good place to start in terms of looking at that in a bit more detail.
Love it. I love it. I mean, so many insights that you've shared, and I'm conscious that I've got a few minutes left with you, because that's why people. That's why I guess it's book number 2. Maybe you're going to talk about some other stuff in book number 2. Maybe but just to finish off around sort of stay in the distance. Obviously, your book is around the end. I'm guessing from our conversations that we've had before, it's about the result and the key factors to achieving success aren't, like you say, in the outcome. Obviously, what we're going to do is we're going to put 3 copies. We're going to buy 3 copies of the book, because your book goes to a fantastic cause. I know you mentioned that the royalties go to a brilliant cause, which I'll let you share in a moment. But for people that are really just thinking, actually, obviously they're going to get a copy of the book. What is there anything that's a snippet, a synopsis, a brief at the end of it that you would say, actually, these are the things to think about in terms of if you want to be successful, if you want to achieve the success that some of the brilliant people you have worked with that they've got to do? And I'm guessing it's stay in the distance, but maybe you explain that part. So.
Yeah, thank you for setting me up with that. So those that get the book, I really hope you enjoy. I'm very fortunate that Gareth Southgate, England men's football manager, wrote the foreword. He's a good friend, and I was able to interview and talk to a huge number of athletes and coaches. For women out there listening, I made a real point to try and interview and cover and feature as many female athletes, teams and coaches as male. Historically, many of these books have been written by men and feature, male athletes, teams and coaches. I'm not denigrating them. I do the same. I feature, men's football teams. I feature the All Blacks just in a very limited way, because they get featured everywhere else. But there are Adam Peaty, Tom Daley, but I also feature their female coaches. So there's hopefully a good gender balance there. There's lots of new stories there, as well as kind of existing stories that people will know. So I really hope you enjoy the book. And as you've said, James, the royalties for this book are going to the Dame Kelly Holmes Trust, which is a youth charity which works with young people who face disadvantage due to inequality in their everyday lives, and they put them shoulder to shoulder with world-class athletes. So I'm really happy to be donating my royalties back to the trust. Key things to take away. The first part of the book, how to get the best out of yourself over the long term. As I said, it is about thinking effortfully about how you show up to work every day to make sure that you can really sustain that performance over the long term. So I look at how to find your confidence sweet spot, how to leave behind fear, which also looks at perfectionism in that chapter, how to leverage your emotions, how to sustain your motivation, how to bring the required discipline to the table, and how to prioritize your time. The second half, as I said, is very much how you get the best out of those around you over the long term, so those you lead. And I pick up on some areas which I discovered through the research that I did, both through the sports angle, but also research in the academic world and business world, where I cover case studies from Netflix, Microsoft, and organizations like that, that there are a small number of areas that make a significant difference in terms of how you get the best out of the people you lead. And those look at things like trust. So how to build trust, how to find the right balance of belief in your people, make sure it's not, unrealistic, but also it's not limiting. How to really build the right sense of belonging. So people really feel like they belong rather than just fitting in. How to develop people in a long-term way. How to communicate with a positive impact rather than a negative impact. How to make sure your values really count. And then the last one, which I left to the end because I found particularly fascinating, because again, easy in sport, can you do it in business, is how to navigate the ownership conundrum. Something which gets talked about a lot in business at the moment. We should be delegating, we should be empowering our people, we should be giving them a sense of direction and control. We can do that in sport, we know how to. Can we transfer that across into the world of business? So that was a chapter I particularly enjoyed researching and writing.
Amazing. So look, we're going to give, as I say, like we do with when we interview fantastic authors, we're going to give people a chance to. So the first three people that I'm going to buy some 3 copies of the book, which if you put in the form, which we'll put accompanied with the podcast and the video, if you put it into the form, the first 3 people to do that will get a copy of the book. Will be sent to them, and so and I'm sure, as I say, you're going to. There's so many insights you've already shared already today about how to achieve things. And I guess the point for me, which, a lot of people listening to this will maybe not be those big CEOs of big companies or those big, but actually what you talk about and what you've talked about today is actually, this isn't about your position. This isn't about your hierarchy in the world or whatever. It's just about being true to yourself in many respects. A lot of things that you've talked about there are around actually people just being the best version of them that they can be, and having that clear purpose and north style of, I use that phrase a lot as well myself, that place where they want to get to. And they don't need to be in big business to do that. You can be the smallest business doing that, right?
You couldn't have summarized it better, James. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, look, so thank you. And so the final thing I was going to ask you is a question that I've just started to ask to those that I've done interviews with, and I wanted to ask you this, and that's that you've obviously achieved a lot of things in your life, and you've got a lot of your life still to live. But what do you want? When people look back, and we all never want to think about the moments when we're not here because we're a long time away. But what do you want people to say about Catherine, when you're no longer here? What do you want the world to say about you and what you've achieved? I'd love you to answer that question.
I'm smiling because it's a big question, that, isn't it? But it is one I've been asked before and I've sort of heard. So I'm going to give what I think is quite a simple answer, but because it's something I've thought about quite a lot. And I think in order to answer something simplistically, you have to have thought about it quite a lot first. You should distill it down. So I would like people to say she added rather than took away.
Oh my goodness me. I love that. What a fantastic way to, can't say any more than that. So I've lost words on that whole point. She added rather than took away. Love it. What a brilliant way to
thank you. I'm glad it's had that response from you.
It is, because I think it's just a great brief synopsis of a brilliant purpose and way to be. So no, congratulations. I love that, and you certainly are adding to people, and the work you're doing is obviously making a huge difference in so many people's lives, and I know it's going to impact a lot of the people listening to this as well. So thank you so much. I could have talked to you for hours and hours on end, but I'm conscious of your time and you've got a lot going on, and thank you for giving up your time today. How can I know people obviously going to get the chance? People always sometimes ask me, how can I get hold of people? You're a very busy lady, so I'm conscious I'm not going to give out your details and stuff like that, but the best way is obviously for them to read the book and then get in contact with you. I'm sure if you've got some questions, I'm sure if you maybe we might even say we'll do a live Q&A with you in time that you could ask some questions.
Absolutely. And in the meantime, I mean, I'm very happy. So I have a huddle on my website, which is a free resource for people to look at. There's a whole load of blogs there around many of the things that we've been talking about. So the website address is www.sportandbeyond.co.uk. So anyone who wants to, and they're all short pieces, please do take a look there to find some insight and some inspiration from there as well. And yeah, book available on Amazon and all the usual sites.
We'll put the link into the podcast anyway. Look, Catherine, thank you so much, because you've given me 4 books that I've now got to go and read and listen. I tend to listen to a lot of books for me, which is I spend time in the car, so I'm an avid book listener at the moment. But look, whether you read them or listen to them, the key thing is learning and taking that learning. And what you shared today, I think, is also a prominent thing is the fact of it's full of that research. We're always learning, right? We're always learning by picking up ideas and insights from other people, and that's how you become successful. And I'm guessing that's how you've transformed that onto your sons to be successful in what they do. That learning.
Success as a team sport always needs a lot of good people around you. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, look, thank you so much for giving me your time. I absolutely appreciate it. I know everyone is going to love the podcast when it comes out, so couldn't thank you enough. And look, as I say, finally from Catherine, thank you, and good luck in all the work you do. I'm looking forward to the next book. It's going to be great to see that come out, and we're going to hopefully share some insights in or the people that get the book are going to get some incredible things on how they can stay the distance and succeed in what they choose to do as well. So thank you.
Fantastic. My pleasure, James. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thanks so much for inviting me on.
So there you have it. That was Catherine Baker. What a brilliant lady, author, who shared some incredible insights then on how to achieve success. And yeah, I'm looking forward to. So if you are interested and want to receive a copy of the book, be the first person, put comments in the section below. We've got 3 copies available. You could have a chance to get a hold of Catherine's book, Stay in the Distance, and see how you can achieve success that you want. So that's it from this week. See you soon.